the contribution of services to value added, particularly business services, we'll mention, happening in various ways. We call this sort of the overall servicification of manufacturing. It could be within the boundaries of the firm, which either could be inside the production unit. So basically, there's a production unit that produces both goods and services, which is known in the literature in servitization and production. Or it could be through ownership control, or it could be outsourcing of services. So there's only a contracting relationship between the services firms and providing inputs to say manufacturing. So the first node, shall we say, is servitization, which is bundled firms. We have a data set of 122,000 South Asian firms. And on the left-hand side, you can see that about 6% of the firms in the data set produce both goods and services. So they're bundled. And whereas 38% are manufacturing, and most of them are actually services. So what we did is we compared the pure manufacturing firms, you could say, the gray ones, to the bundled ones, and saw what is sort of the difference in performance. And you can see on the right-hand side, these are the regression results, that servitized firms, so bundled firms, have more intangibles, are larger, it's larger size, quite a bit more, have made more net income as well. However, they tend to be less profitable, and more importantly, they're about 13.6% less productive than pure manufacturing firms. So the results from this is that actually bundling does not seem to be a good way for manufacturing to go. And this is actually quite different to what there's some other research done with actually the same sort of methodology for other emerging market and developing economies that found that servitization firms that switched to bundling actually became more productive. What about through ownership control? So servitization and production through arm's length specialization is when you have a services firm, say a firm of engineers that are designing something, but they're actually owned by another company, a headquarter firm that is in manufacturing, and it could be in a different country or in the same country. And what we found there is this seems to hit the sweet spot. Service firms in South Asia that have an owner in the manufacturing sector are relatively more successful than services firms along several traits: size, much larger generally, income, labor productivity, growth in net income, and intangible shares, which is a sense of innovation. And even though the difference here is small, this is highly significant and robust. And basically, this is, again, just comparing services, pure services firms with services that are owned by a manufacturing sector. And we think the reason for this result is because, maybe you have the financing, you have the technology transfer, you have all those advantages, but at the same time, you're sort of left on your own devices to really specialize in what you're good at. So this seems to work in South Asia. Then outsourcing of services, there's two ways of thinking about it. One way, which might be more sort of domestic outsources, which is indirect links of firms, for example, in the same urban center. You may think of agglomeration externalities that occur a lot in urbanization. So you have these spillover effects from people sort of relating to each other. And here we tried an interesting sort of text mining technique to look at what's called the trade description, which is every firm in this data set has to say a little bit about what they do. And in some of the words, we could actually take words that are more related to activities mostly associated with manufacturing, and which sort of were on the blue side of the Venn diagram, or with services. And some may have activities that you could relate to. And in that sense, what we do on the right-hand side is we take these 4 types of business services firms, digital and optical, scientific research and development, et cetera, and see that relative to what they say they do, they actually provide a lot of services, and very strong relationships with manufacturing, which is the orange part of this. And likewise, we also looked at a few high-tech manufacturing and transport and electrical equipment, and find that they also seem to have strong relationships with certain types of services. So this gave us sort of an indirect view that a lot of these activities are very close together. Finally, indirect forward links through global value chains, mostly foreign. We really tried to look at sort of a global way, and how is sort of South Asia either outsourcing directly or indirectly some of these services. And what we find is, of course, India, not surprisingly, does extremely well. they are, you can see in the charts. Let me just show you what we're seeing here. When there's an increase in the demand for manufacturing, let's say an automobile, dollar increase in a rupee increase in a dollar, that creates a demand for inputs from services, right? Which is what we have here. So in the case of, for example, of India, about 20 cents of services inputs will be demanded for a dollar increase in demand globally for manufacturing. And on the right-hand side, we see the indirect effect. So once those services start producing, they in turn are going to start demanding, so the spillover effect, other goods and services from other sectors. And this is sort of the secondary indirect effect, which is very important. And you can see India does extremely well. Other countries in South Asia don't do so well, although interestingly enough, these black dots show you the change in the last decade, and you can see that there's been a huge increase. So we looked at specific services, including business and professional services, which could include engineering, but also technical level. It doesn't have to be sort of high level degrees, and did the same exercise. And on the left-hand side, you can see here the same indirect effect, this spillover effect against per capita income. And we see a very strong relationship between per capita income and the spillover effect. And here, these little orange dots are actually India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, which actually show that for their level of development, they actually do quite a bit better on this indicator. We did some regressions to find out that this is this holds very strongly. And interestingly enough, if a country starts to do this, it's persistent. In other words, the more you start sort of having the spillover effect, the more you're likely to have it in the next period, which essentially means that this is a really promising way of thinking about the impact of services on development, directly on manufacturing growth and development. And you can see, for example, these are the GVC hubs, India, Germany, and US, and they're off the charts. So there's something here. So another thing we looked at is adoption of digital technologies, and I'm going to just go very quickly through what the thing is, but of course Siddharth is going to be presenting some of his work that has gone much more beyond this. He was really the person in the chapter who developed this section. So just to show you what we did and how it's supposed to work. So platform makes it easier for buyers to batch sellers, of course, enable trust between buyers and sellers, facilitate long distance transactions, which will increase market access for firms. And this is a way that really digital platforms can allow small firms or even just an informal sector person, right, to take advantage of economies of scale, learning by doing, increasing productivity. We no longer need sort of this factory to get these gains. And one of the results that we get, this is sort of an interesting one, is that these are some firms in India that do e-commerce, and it's sort of a difference here that any positive number means that those who adopted e-commerce compared to those that didn't. So, and these are the number of months. So months after adoption, you can see that those who adopted e-commerce are, for example, after 3 months, 2% more likely to have higher business, will have higher business profits on average. And this goes on, and actually for the 8, it's actually 8 or more. So this actually already shows that we do see that people who adopt these e-commerce in India, but that the other examples of other countries do seem to be more profitable and more innovative as well. Finally, just wanted to show you very quickly some results on employment that we got, because Najib raised a very important point, which is there is an issue with services-led development, which is that there could be leading to inequality. And what we find is that, yes, you do need actually a critical level of well, let me just go into this chart here. I wanted to show you this because this is sort of a reality that we don't really notice. This is basically the number of services providers in these 4 subsectors, which you could think of we always think of them as fabrication, manufacturing, low tech, medium tech, and high tech. And you can see that, in fact, in South Asia, we use the US as a comparator. These are the green ones, but South Asian countries are the others, Pakistan here at the end. A large amount of the workers in the manufacturing sector, they're mapped to manufacturing, are actually services providers. And the orange dots show that they've actually increased quite a bit. So this is a reality now. Many people actually work in services, not just in the services sector, but in the manufacturing. So what we wanted to show is that not only do you need a core set of business services to really get things going, but that the spillover effects that I discussed before will allow more low-tech services and more learning by doing to allow for the services-led development. So services will only be able to lead development if we can show that they expand jobs and income, and the observed structural change in the last decade does bode well for South Asia. First, we asked, okay, where do people in South Asia work? What kinds of jobs do they have? I already showed you a little bit of that. How does it compare to the advanced services-led economy, which is the US, which we use? Are the changes in the last 10 years conducive to a service-led economy in terms of trends and upgrading of skills? And has there been a general upgrading of skills in the labor force that we've seen? Here is a picture of the share of occupations to total in 3 countries. We have it for some other countries as well. US on the left, India and Pakistan. And the sort of orange, yellow, red shaded are services, with the red being managers, and orange are sort of more high skilled, medium skilled, low skilled services. And the blue is fabrication, green is agriculture, and gray is other. And a few observations to make, and I know this very quick. One is that you can see that the US hasn't changed very much in the last decade. You don't really see much structural transformation there in terms of labor, very much the same. However, 3/4 of their workers are in services, and they're not all high-tech skilled services. They are mostly medium and low skilled services. So the fact that you have to have everybody, with a graduate degree is just not the case. If we look at India, you can see there's been a big increase in services occupations, in Pakistan as well, especially in the sort of middle to low term. So this also bodes well for these countries. Finally, we took the whole labor force survey and we looked at, given occupations, whether there had been an upgrading over the last 10 years or so of occupations. In other words, are people doing more high skill, low skill jobs? Do we have, mechanical engineers becoming Uber drivers, or do we have people actually learning on the jobs and becoming more skilled? And it turns out to be the latter, which is very good news. This gives you the non-shaded is just is basically everything, including managers, and then we excluded managers in the sample, and we still see for all countries. Actually, for Pakistan, we don't see that much of a change, but we do see that when we exclude the managers, we do see a upskilling of Pakistan's labor force from 09 to 18. So our policy challenges are that the rapid transformation of the services sector requires really new policies to move away from vested interests, rethinking of regulations, and perhaps even new institutions in 2 key areas: trade and competition, and skills. And this is my last slide. I'm going to go very quickly because I'm hoping that during the panel we will really be able to look at this much more. But just wanted to very quickly say that, business and professional services sectors, which are key, as I showed, is still heavily regulated compared to other countries. This regulatory sandboxes are therefore recommended, because you cannot simply replicate conventional regulation of manufacturing to services anymore. We're in a completely different sort of field right now, especially post-COVID. And although we're not quite out there, but so the most important thing of these services, the opportunities for on-the-job reskilling. Learning on the job is extremely important for services, which was different in manufacturing, right? Where you really needed lots of low-skilled workers. And finally, one example of a sort of a good policy would be services centers. So every sort of urban center could have a place where people can learn skills, learn to start jobs, etc. This is something that should become much more common, should we say. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much, and thank you, Zoe, as well for organizing this. My colleague, I know that she's there.
Wi-Fi का बटन बंद कर
Over to you, Abdullah.
Thank you, Dr. Blackman. Very well, very interesting presentation that you just shared, and you have rightly pointed that new institutional capacity must be developed to regulate the digital economy. And you also rightly pointed that adoption of e-commerce is no doubt associated with a sustained increase in business profit. And our rapporteurs are noting down the policy recommendations, and we will be sharing it after the STC. Now, moving forward, I would like to request Ms. Shazia Naz for her presentation, please.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Uh, Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm Shazia Naz. Is impact of foreign direct investment on services export of Pakistan, a sectoral analysis. Structure of the presentation, introduction, review of the literature, theoretical framework, empirical methodology, data, results, and conclusions. So finally, introduction, the increase in the trade of the services has been accelerated because of the well-defined regulatory regime, technological advancement. Developing countries and emerging markets uh, attempts to attract the FDI because of bringing with them the superior technology, managerial, and market expertise. So FDI has the two interactive effects, productivity impacts and counter impacts. Multinational corporations are also interested to establish in the developing countries in order to achieve the greater efficiency and cost effectiveness. So the positive impact of the FDI can be associated with the absorptive capability of the host country. Review of the literature, there is a vast explains the link between the sectoral FDI and services export. So there is a strong association between the services export and sectoral FDI, according to the Dash and 2013, Wong et al. 2011, Tang and Bong 2009, Shrivastava 2006, Eisenman and Mai 2006, Moshirian and Sim 2005, Cow et al. 2003. Lee et al. 2016 demonstrates the FDI responsiveness according to the sectoral characteristics. And Kuchel and Bossett 2007 explores the two types of the FDI as the effect and supply increasing capacity effect. Etkin et al. 1997 analyzes the export behavior of the local and the foreign enterprises. Theoretical framework, services FDI and manufacturing FDI both can provide the several benefits towards the host country of 2008. So though whenever FDI emergencies in the services sectors, namely telecommunication, transportation, financial business, and telecommunication, services are, it relates to the professional and the business. Whenever it establishes, it facilitates the information and communication technologies, creation and diffusion of the knowledge exchange and specialization. So in this way, FDI stimulates the innovative capabilities of the host country, and services can participate in the international market through the exports. And when FDI exists in the manufacturing sectors, either high tech or the low tech, it builds the production linkages, which actually works as the vertical linkages. And vertical linkages indicate the export-oriented services, because FDI explores the strong forward and backward linkages after importing the skills and management expertise from its parent company. Afterward, it reveals the two types of the FDI, FDI supply increasing capacity effect and FDI specific effect. And here, FDI specific effects works actually exports mechanism in the services export, because it relates to the soft technology. And in this way, FDI can increase the reliability of the local services in the international market through the quality enhancements. Now, these services have become the newer and modernized and have the capacity to participate in the international market through the exports. Now, the relationship between the sectoral FDI and services export can be defined in the following equation. Services exports is the function of the FDI in financial business, in trade, in constructions, telecommunication, transportation, and others, power and chemicals. Empirical methodology. It's crucial to examine the every single time series for the unit 2 test before utilizing the Granger causality technique first. For this purpose, the augmented Dickey-Fuller and Phillips-on-Piron test have been employed. And Johansson's co-integration test have been utilized to find whether the variables are co-integrated. So after certifying the co-integration among the involved models variable, this study uses the FMOLS estimation to analyze the long-run elasticities between the dependent and independent variable. Afterwards, This study also employs the dynamic OLS estimation to examine the long-run association between the dependent and independent variable. And finally, a vector error correction model has been applied to analyze the convergence of the variable towards the equilibrium and find the long-run causality among the variables. So thus the equation for studying the effects of the sectoral FDI on the services exports in the case of the Pakistan following as, and here the FDI variable represents the different sectors and that are used interchangeably by the financial, business, telecommunication, transportation, power, chemical, trade, construction, and other data. The current study uses the cubic spline interpolation method to attain the smooth evaluation of the quarterly data from the annual data recommended by the Store and Bullrich 2002. And this study uses the time series quarterly data set for the period 2001 quarter 1 to 2019 quarter 4, comprising the 76 observations. So the data for the services export is obtained from the World Bank indicator, and the data for the FDI sectors is obtained from the State Bank of the Pakistan and statistics board of the investment, and the data for the other control variables such as the GDP growth, gross fixed capital formation, and secondary and tertiary is obtained from the WDI. And so the data for the institutions is obtained from the World Governance Indicator, and the data for the real effective exchange rates is obtained from the IMF. And here the conversion of the real effective exchange rates is excluded as it is available at the IMF as a quarterly data. Now I am moving towards my results. According to the Unit-Root results, according to both these tables, all the variables are stationary at the first difference. Johansson's co-integration test, according to all these tables, all the specified models are co-integrated at a certain number of the equation from 1 to 3. Fully modified OLS estimation. Here I'm applying the two regressions, fully modified OLS estimation and dynamic OLS estimations. So according to this table of the fully modified OLS estimates recommend for the that the present institution, education level, especially tertiary and real effective exchange rate works superbly to strengthen the services export for the Pakistan. And now robustness analysis, dynamic OLS estimation, and according to this table, the results of the dynamic OLS estimation clearly indicates that the FDI presence in the sectors, namely telecommunication, transportation, and trade, not construction, trade, and others, have a significant and positive impact on the services exports, and all these results are consistent with the results of the FMOLS estimations. Now, I'm moving towards the vector error correction models. In the model number 1, the results of the vector error correction model clearly demonstrates for the Pakistan that there is a long-run possession between the services exports and FDI in the telecommunication. It clearly appears that the services exports tend to converge towards the equilibrium as a response to the change in the FDI in the telecommunication. And here only the GDP variable, GDP growth, is a significant variable to explain the services export in the short run. Similarly, in the model number 2, the presence of the FDI in transportation becomes a source to enhance the service exports in the long run. It means that the services export converge towards the equilibrium as a response to the change in the FDI in the transportation. Here also GDP growth is only a one significant variable to explain the services exports in the long run. Now I'm moving towards my model number 8, because in model number 8 I have the significant results, and according to this model there persists the long run position between the services export and FDI in the others. It means that the services exports also converge towards the equilibrium as a response to the change in the FDI in the others. others. For my other models, there are not long-run position perceived for the FDI presence in the other sectors and services exports. Now, finally, I'm moving towards my conclusion. And according to my study, the conclusion is that Pakistan needs to upgrade the prospects for the entry of the international players. And so the liberalization policies of the foreign direct investments and trade should be undertaken by the government of Pakistan, because the accelerated advancement in the communication and information in the Pakistan have a wide scope for the export-oriented services. So the Pakistan should exploit the complementary linkages between the services exports and FDI to boost the global competitiveness. So the particular institutional measures and appropriate regulatory structure is needed to construct the balance between the equity and efficiency. So the government should provide
Ms. Shazi. I think we have lost her. Ms. Shazi, are you there? Technical team would be looking into this matter. No doubt, Shazi has directly pointed that Pakistan needs to upgrade the prospect for entry into international players, as FDI stimulates the innovative capabilities of the market, particularly the local label market. And Shazia, can you hear us? She joins, we'll start from where she had left, and hopefully I think that's only the last slide she was on, but she's back. She's back.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
So can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Shazia, loud and clear.
Okay, fine. So I will complete my conclusion, my presentation as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. We'll be taking questions at the end of this session. So if anyone has any particular question that they want to ask Shazia, they can do it at the end of the session. And so without wasting any further time, we'll move towards Dr. Siddharth Sharma for his thoughts on how selling online is affecting informal firms in South Asia. Over to you, Dr. Siddharth.
Thank you, Mr. Abdullah. Thank you for the opportunity to present. I'm going to share my screen. I hope you can see it. So I'm going to be presenting our paper on how selling online is affecting informal firms in South Asia. As my colleague Valerie alluded in her presentation, this is going to be about the impact of digital platforms on small informal firms, and as Naji was spelling out the whole landscape of servicification, services-led growth in the beginning. This is one area where we think a services industry, which is digital platforms, can help improve the productivity of the rest of the economy. So it could be in selling goods and services. So this is where it fits into the overall picture. This is joint work with Mauricio Busolo, Akshay Dikshit, Ann Gola, Ananya Kotia, Jean Lee, and Prema Narasimhan. So the key research question we ask is engaging with e-commerce platforms helping small informal firms grow, and how exactly is that happening? And the backdrop to all this is, as you all know, informality, despite decades of growth, has remained stubbornly high in South Asia. On the other hand, e-commerce is a rapidly expanding industry. And there is this sense, which you see in the press, or even in government policy reports, etc., that there's a sense that platforms could actually help transform the landscape for small firms. But the evidence on this is quite limited. Now, to start with, let's think about what are the traits that you see in informal firms. So some of the common traits that they have are they are small. Informal firms are really small. They tend to sell in a very limited market. So many of them are actually selling in a very local market. I'm sorry, I think there is someone who has their mic on. Could they please mute? Thank you.
No, it's settled. It's settled, Dr.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So as I was saying, small firms, they have some certain traits. They are small. They sell in a small market. They tend to have limited access to credit, and so they tend to be labor intensive, and they tend to employ outdated technologies, and they have very simple management practices. Right? Sometimes they are too small to even have a proper management structure. Now, of course, the literature is divided on what causes this large informal sector. And there's one view which says that this is a choice by firms. Some firms don't have much to gain by formalizing, and so they choose to stay informal. They think that the cost of being informal, the regulations, the taxes may be too high. There is this other view that firms do want to formalize, they can gain from it, but the cost of entry into the formal sector is really high, so they are being excluded. Now, what can digital platforms, e-commerce platforms do? Right? So in theory, they can shift the incentives that make firms choose informality, or they can remove or affect the barriers that force firms into informality. But at the same time, they could also exacerbate the gap between formal and informal firms. And let me explain how that might be. So thinking about the positive impacts in that digital platforms could have. So what a platform does is to reduce a lot of transactions cost in the market. So it makes it easy to find buyers and sellers, to replicate things. It makes logistical difficulties easier. It helps to verify transactions. So the result of all this is it could be to reduce the need for scale, for large capital. It could reduce the cost of matching in a market. And it could even lead to better management practices and lead to improved market access. But platforms can also work in the opposite direction. So, and this is because platforms themselves have a tendency to acquire market power, and they become big players, right? Think of Amazon, what an important player it is in the market now in developed countries. So this market power could actually then start to make it harder for smaller firms to compete. And even if platforms can reduce a lot of these transactional barriers, some transactional barriers may still remain. For example, consumers or firms in rural areas may still not be comfortable or may not trust digital transactions. So it can have both these positive or negative effects. So what we do is to contribute to the evidence base by conducting two quantitative case studies of digital platforms, Chaldar and Daraz. I'll explain what they are. But what we'll present is based on surveys of the firms that sell on these e-commerce platforms. And our findings are encouraging. They tilt the balance of evidence towards some positive impact on small informal firms. Obviously, it's not the final word. We think it's really the beginning of a very interesting research agenda for South Asia. So what we find, just to give a preview, is that these are the direct impacts that the platforms seem to be having on the firms that sell on them. It's helping them access more customers. It's helping them expand their sales. And we also see some evidence that it is helping them adopt better practices, better technologies. There is some impact on access to finance. And there is this other aspect of, with very small producers or entrepreneurs, it's helping them balance their home and work life. So the flexibility helps. It also seems to be affecting their incentive to register and to formalize. We don't find that these impacts are helping bigger or more formal firms more than informal firms. So there is no evidence in our data of an increasing gap between formal and informal firms due to the platform. And the big caveat we want to give is that generalizing our results is not easy because it's based on a survey of firms that are already selling on the platform. And in that sense, it's a selected group because these firms may not be like the typical small informal firm in a South Asian country. And indeed, some of the comparisons that we do will suggest that these firms are not like the typical informal firms. So maybe some types of firms can gain, but not all. Okay, so let me explain what the case study is. So as I said, we do surveys of sellers on two platforms, Chaldal and Daraz. Chaldal, very briefly, is an online grocery service in Bangladesh. And so it offers very fast delivery on a lot of grocery items, including fresh fruits and vegetables and food products. And it's expanding rapidly. Now, Chaldal has about 350 suppliers, and they range from even individual producers to small food product manufacturers, traders, and even large multinationals that are in this industry. And Chaldal is actively goes out and selects these people, these suppliers. Okay? So not any firm can just go and sign up to be a supplier on Chaldal. Now, Daraz, in contrast, is a more kind of standard e-commerce or a marketplace. And you may know it operates in Pakistan also, and also in other countries in South Asia. And it has about 35 million customers and 100,000 vendors. So it has many more sellers than Chaldal. And one of the features of the Daraz is that it really wants to make the site, the platform, accessible to almost anyone with a smartphone. And so provide a marketplace that is accessible to even very small entrepreneurs. So just some very quick a look at the characteristics of sellers on Chaldal. What I want to emphasize here is that the two platforms are slightly different. So first of all, Chaldal, as I said, is focused only on Bangladesh, whereas Daraz is found in 4 countries in South Asia. Second, going down, the average seller on Chaldal is a slightly bigger and older firm, more established as compared to Daraz. And this is no surprise, as I was saying, Daraz explicitly aims to be very open to all sorts of small entrepreneurs. Right? And it's a marketplace, whereas Chaldal is more specialized. So one of the things you'll note is that Daraz, almost 90% of the firms selling on Daraz actually have 5 or fewer workers. So there are lots of small firms selling on Daraz. Chaldal also has some small firms selling, but not so many micro firms. So about 40% of firms on Chaldal have less than 20 workers, which also means that 60% have more than 20 workers. So Chaldal has a much wider range of firm sizes. Almost all the firms on Chaldal have a formal legal structure, and they have VAT tax registration. In the case of Daraz, these rates of formalization are lower. Okay. So now, what you'll see in what we find in terms of impact is that despite these differences in the profile of firms on these two platforms, many of the main impacts seem to be quite similar. So I'll just quickly go through some of the impacts, and this is not comprehensive. There's not enough time to show them. But our first main finding is that joining the platform seems to increase market access and to increase sales. Right? So when asked why they joined the platform Chaldal, overwhelmingly the answer most of the sellers chose was to reach more customers. So you see here, it's 94% saying it's to reach more customers. The other 2 top reasons also relate to market access. So it's about trying to diversify sales or to get more reliable sales. Right? So it's really about market access. And when they were asked, did your sales and employment increase after joining the platform? 85% of firms said, yes, our sales revenue has increased. So these are self-reported impacts, but they seem to be quite positive in terms of market access. Secondly, joining Chaldal also seems to have changed business practices. And we think this may have happened in 2 ways. One is that joining the platform gives you more information. Secondly, once you join the platform, you're selling in a bigger market, and you have a stronger incentive to improve the way you do business. So we asked firms some questions about, did you improve the way you market your goods? Did you change the way you package your goods? Did you change your bookkeeping, accounting practices? And a lot of firms said, yes, we have changed these aspects of our business practices. For example, 50% of firms said that they have improved the way they market their goods after joining the platform. And the third area of impact is this thing about the firm's relationship with the state and with the financial sector. So a lot of firms said that their incentives to formally register and their visibility to the tax authorities has increased after joining the platform. And about 50% of firms also agree or strongly agree that their access to finance has improved. So when they were asked directly, have you increased your usage of bank loans after joining the platform? About 80% said yes. Now that seems like a low number, but remember this is a context where access to finance is probably the major constraint for most firms, and a lot of firms don't have bank loans at all. So we think there is some impact here also. In the case of the DARAs too, the impacts are similar. So overwhelmingly, firms say that agree that their business has grown. But one difference with Chaldal is that firms also really appreciate the flexibility that selling on DARAs offers. So they say that their work-life balance has improved, and they really value the aspect that it allows them to work from home. And this, in fact, we think is different in the case of DARAs because DARAs has a lot of really small sellers selling on the market, and maybe they even work from home, and they really value this flexibility. Now, when it comes to, we wanted to see if the smaller firms that sell on these platforms are doing just as well or worse or better than the larger firms. And what we find in overall is that the smaller firms are just as likely as
आपके नाम पे मेरी वीडियो आ रही है
I would request Ms. Shazia Naz to keep her mic mute, please.
Okay, so thank you. So if you see here, what we do is we just cut the response to whether your sales and employment has increased by firm size on Chaldal. And you can see that smaller firms are just as likely to report an increase in sales after joining the platform. There is some difference in terms of employment, but when we do regressions and we control for other factors, then we see that there is basically no difference between small and large firms. So this suggests that smaller firms, informal firms, are benefiting just as much as larger firms on these platforms. There's no evidence of increasing that. We see the same thing with DARAs as well. So there is no significant difference between small and large firms. The one thing where we see a slight difference is that smaller firms are more likely to benefit from flexibility. So in fact, it seems like there is one area in which smaller firms are actually gaining even more than larger firms. I'm sorry, there's someone who's not muted and there's some feedback. Can I please request you to? Okay, thank you. It's better now. So, as I was saying, there doesn't seem to be any evidence that the impacts differ for informal firms. They seem to gain as much as they can. But as I had said in the beginning, there is this issue of selectivity. The firms we are looking at are firms that have already joined these platforms. So are they actually the typical informal firm? And they are not. So what we find is that the firms on Chaldal and DARAs are more educated, younger than the typical informal firms. For example, if you look at a sample of manufacturing firms, average manufacturing firms in Bangladesh, 54% of their managers have graduate degrees. In the case of Chaldal, 79% of managers have graduate degrees. So they have more educated managers. 90% of the typical manufacturing firms are actually family managed and owned. Right? And so they're more traditional. That rate of family ownership and management is lower in the case of Chaldal. Now, similarly, in the case of DARAs, again, you see that if you compare the DARA seller to a typical household business in India, the DARA seller is significantly more educated and younger. So it seems like, now it's not clear why less educated and older firms in the informal sector have not joined these platforms. It could be because there are barriers to adoption of platforms, or it could be that they don't have much to gain from it. So this is something worth looking at in more future research. So to sum up, the case studies that we present here contribute to the evidence base, and they suggest that to some informal firms, those that join these platforms, they have the potential to gain as much as larger firms. And the main channel of impact is this market access. And this is significant because there's a lot of research now suggesting that there are major demand side constraints to firm growth. in the context of trade, etc., you see that impact. So in as much as the platform is reducing these demand-side constraints, it could have a major impact on firms. Additionally, we find that there is some impact on your incentive to formalize, to change the way you do business. And as I said, not much difference between small and large firms. But there is this issue of selectivity. And given the selectivity, we think that policies could help by helping smaller firms connect to these platforms, so improve digital infrastructure, improve last mile connectivity, and perhaps you could think about informational campaigns so that online transactions become more familiar and trustworthy to the informal sector. So with that, I will stop.
Thank you very much, Dr. Siddharth. No doubt you have rightly pointed, and your paper has rightly identified that the demand side constraint do exist for the e-commerce on the e-commerce platform for small firms in developing countries, and especially in the case that you presented in Bangladesh and in Pakistan. Indeed, public policy interventions will be useful in this matter. And you have rightly highlighted that digital infrastructure, efficient postal and parcel service, and access to finance will be required, particularly in the informal sector. So moving forward, I would like, as Mr. Badr Khushnud Saab, being the chairman of Pakistan Association of Software Houses, sir, I would like you to shed light on how are digital platforms affecting South Asian small firms, particularly Pakistan, and what barriers do you think small firms face in using digital platforms? It could be in ICT, professional and business service, sir.
Thank you very much, Abdullah. I hope you guys can hear me.
Yes, loud and clear.
So first of all, I'd like to appreciate Dr. Siddharth's and Dr. Valeri's presentation. Truly enjoyed them. And Dr. Siddharth, I could relate to it because I'm also involved in the e-commerce space from policy making to actually execution. So really could connect to that. So thanks for sharing that. And the servicization of manufacturing was also an interesting narrative. And I think that's certainly coming in soon. So quickly speaking, from Pakistan perspective, I'll share a few quick data points, and maybe we can then, I'll try to elaborate a few things within my 7 minutes. So in Pakistan, let's focus on two things. One is pure IT, which is IT and ICT technologies, and then their usage domestically and as export, as a services export. The other complementing part is IT-enabled services, and e-commerce being one of them. And then there are, of course, different types of IT-enabled services like fintech, prop tech, and all of those, and or health tech. But e-commerce being the narrative today, I'll focus on those. So from pure IT perspective, Pakistan's exports has grown nearly 50% in the last last financial year, or to be precise, 47% from 1.2 to $2.1 billion. And that is purely into IT services being rendered out of Pakistan. We believe, and as per some data points which are not otherwise publicly available, we believe that the local domestic services market, IT services market, is either the same size or a little larger than that probably. So what is happening is the life cycle of this is that an IT graduate converts, and this is, I'm talking about majority and not, of course, there are extreme cases otherwise. So an IT graduate converts into a freelancer, start servicing online freelancing through various web platforms out of Pakistan. And then they start grouping together into smaller groups informally. And that becomes an informal firm where these group of people start building together on different services. For example, maybe a programmer or a developer or an engineer would work together with a designer or maybe a content person and so on and so forth. And then they get together and start kind of adding value to their services. And then that firm eventually, informal firm graduates into a formal registered firm as an SECP registered or a Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan registered private limited or an AOP firm. And then they graduate into the next phase. So that's the kind of life cycle of how IT services. And then these people who are probably offering local services start also offering foreign services or exports of services. But most of them are into exports of services, and they certainly have a cost arbitrage in terms of earning in dollars, but having a cost of living in PKR. And that's where the benefit is. So that's pure IT. And I think that's something which is growing. However, the challenge right now is we have about 300,000 employees or staff member in that ecosystem. And currently in Pakistan, another 25 to 35,000 graduate every year. However, their employability is a challenge. So something which Dr. Valerie highlighted is something we need to do two things in Pakistan, and that's a policy challenge. One, we need to retrain some of them on job so that they can upgrade their skills from probably 2-3 years old technologies to the new, more cutting edge technologies, remaining on the job and continuing adding value to the current businesses. And the other is to upgrade our current curriculum and also improve faculty knowledge or improve capacity building on the faculty as well, because so that they can share and the same knowledge or quality of knowledge on the new curriculum into the graduating students. Those who have graduated in this period need to be upgraded through boot camps and other methods as well. So that's something which the government is working on right now, the federal government, and also at least the Punjab provincial government is certainly working on these two things. So that's the pure IT side of it, where services is being managed both domestically and also in the export sector. The other opportunity or something which has really evolved recently in Pakistan is e-commerce. And that has really changed the landscape of retail, or is at least putting a dent into that. So what is happening is in the last 4 quarters, if you extrapolate State Bank of Pakistan's data, the total transaction value of domestic e-commerce happening in Pakistan using domestic payment gateways and cash on delivery is about $4 billion. So this estimate is done by Pakistan Software Houses Association, PASHA, and Chain Store Association of Pakistan. So we did extrapolation of State Bank's data because the State Bank data only represents 10% of the payments being collected, since 90% is on average is cash on delivery. So this is just to give you a data point that there was at least a $4 billion of domestic transactions happening in Pakistan. Remember, this does not include any transaction value which is using an international payment gateway like 2Checkout or Stripe or anything else outside of Pakistan, because then the transaction is being recorded into that financial system and not in Pakistan. So that's just to give you an idea. And there are large services players who are probably not using Pakistani payment gateways, since their holdco or their parent company has an international presence, and they certainly leverage their larger global contracts or agreements or offers by other payment gateways. So this is just to give you a sense of the scope. That $4 billion is nearly equal or less than 1% of Pakistan's total retail. So 99% of Pakistan's retail is still not digital in that sense from a access to market perspective. Global average of e-commerce to retail ratio is around 18%. This is the latest data post-COVID on Statista. And each country is pretty varied. So China used to be at 27%, is probably certainly far higher than that. USA used to be at 15%, is now at 27% post-COVID. And so this is evolving rapidly, but Pakistan can certainly leapfrog this space. We are right now at less than 1%. I believe we will grow rapidly and grow at least 2 to 3% in the next year, since we are a mobile first economy. And we already have about 100 million internet connections in Pakistan. That's like significantly a large population getting connected to 3G, 4G connectivity. And out of those 100 million, we already have 50 million on social media on different platforms. This data is coming from Pakistan Telecommunication Authority and Facebook and Instagram and other statistics officially. So this is just to give you a data point on, and what we believe is e-commerce is growing certainly rapidly. There is certainly few 100% growth in e-commerce in Pakistan. And this is just to, by the way, highlight, sorry, Abdullah, I just wanted to highlight a couple of points. And please let me know how many minutes do I have. I'll just wrap up in a minute. But so this is just a B2C e-commerce part. And this includes OMPs, which is online marketplaces like Daraz, which Dr. Sadat referred to, and other, of course, players like OLX and Park Wheels. And then we have the Zameens and the Ubers and the Kareems and all of those included. And then we have the direct to consumer e-commerce as well, where brands are selling directly to the consumer, which is a DTC space. So there's OMP space and the DTC space within the B2C. And the new emerging ecosystem in the e-commerce is B2B, where the wholesale to retail space has gotten about $300 million of investment in the last few months. And that space is going to be completely disrupted in the next few months or max few years. And so it's not the pure B2B otherwise in the production or the that side, but the B2B from wholesale to retail is certainly getting disrupted very soon. So just wanted to give you a few data points. There are a lot of recommendations from Pasha. We keep on engaging all the public sector organizations relevant to it. We have already gotten few interventions done, not few actually, I would say several interventions done. And we can discuss them in the comment section or in the question and answer later. Just wanted to give you some sense on where do we stand.
Thank you, brother. So thank you. You've rightly pointed that the e-commerce platform in Pakistan, no doubt, is revamping, and there is for policy challenges, and still people like you who are providing recommendations to the government and to the development partners and think tanks are indeed effective, and people are working on it. So moving forward, I'll come directly to Dr. Gonzalo. Dr. Gonzalo, keeping in view the whole conversation, how it is building, but I would like to ask that if you could share your thoughts on importance of the services, particularly business and professional services, in the value chain of South Asia, particularly in Pakistan, and how post-COVID has led it to a new normal look.
Thank you, Abdullah, and hello to all panelists and attendees. So the services sector has seen a transformation in Pakistan and in the world. Siddharth, Valerie showed some trends on this matter. But in Pakistan, if one looks at business services exports, and I'm going to focus on the export side, what you see is a remarkable transformation. I like to call them, I like to use the term knowledge intensive services rather than talking about business services or software exports, etc. And I'm going to give you three metrics to see how remarkable the transformation in Pakistan in this segment has been. The first one is, if one looks, and it complements what Badar was mentioning before, and he was mentioning actual values of economic activity and exports, but the share of exports of services that was explained by these knowledge intensive services 15 years ago was about 10% in Pakistan. Today it's about 50%. So it's a huge transformation in the export basket. That's first thing. The second thing is that the number of exporters of knowledge intensive services has also dramatically increased out of Pakistan. And today there are about 5,500 firms that are exporting IT and IT-enabled services out of Pakistan that are registered. There are many that are not registered, so we can count them. But the ones that are registered, we're talking about 5,500 exporters. And just to give you a sense, in terms of benchmarking, there are 15,000 exporters of merchandise, like a historic sector, exporters of merchandise, textiles and apparel, agriculture, all sectors of merchandise sum up to 15,000 exporters. Only in the IT-enabled services sector, that is a new sector in Pakistan, you have 5,000 firms, 5,500 firms, exporters. And the third thing that I want to mention is a developmental factor that is associated with this trend with knowledge-intensive services sector exports out of Pakistan. That is the fact that the average size of these exporters is much smaller than the typical average size of a merchandise exporter. So in Pakistan, the average merchandise exporter has an export bill, an annual export bill of $1.4 million. So they're small in this regional picture, but it's still a relatively large firm. In Pakistan, the IT enabled services average exporter exports on average $200,000 a year. So we are talking about a firm that is much smaller. And the fact that a much smaller firm can get internationalized, that is, can get exposed to export markets, is fantastic. It's fantastic from a productivity point of view, because it gets exposed to more competition, it gets exposed to sophisticated clients, and through that exposure learns. And this is something that we saw when we were looking at the opening up of or the formation of the European Union, for example. In the literature of international economics, you could see how, as countries, peripheral countries in Europe got integrated into the EU machine, you could see how gradually you had smaller and smaller and smaller firms were able to export into European markets because trade costs were falling with integration. Well, this is sort of what you see in the case of Pakistan with the emergence of the tradability of knowledge-intensive services. You get smaller and smaller firms that can actually participate in export markets because the costs of entering exports is much lower for services than it is for manufacturing. You need, the issue of scale is smaller. The issue of search and matching costs are lower. And that is good. It's good from a productivity angle, right? It's good that you have these smaller firms that are better exposed to international competition. So all in all, business services in Pakistan are a great, I was going to say a great promise. It's not just a promise, they're a reality, they are there, but there is huge potential to grow further. And so to finish my intervention here, what I want to say is that the follow-up question, and it links to what Naji was mentioning before, is what is it that governments need to do and what is it that governments need not to do to ensure that this services sector, particularly knowledge-intensive services sector, can flourish in Pakistan. And here, what I would say is that the government needs to learn a lot from what worked and from what didn't work in other sectors that perhaps have some similarities in some respects. And I'm going to say two things. The first one is protection that was granted to the merchandise sector backfired from a point of view of export orientation, because it created a very cushioned market domestically, and so it incentivized firms to stay domestic. The fantastic export orientation of knowledge-intensive services in Pakistan may be also related to the fact that they are, set free to go and penetrate external markets, and they don't face this domestic protection that perhaps would have tilted them to sell in the domestic market instead. And the second thing that I want to mention is that for these firms, the payments flows in and out of Pakistan is crucial. And one thing that we see is that many firms choose actually to set accounts elsewhere rather than in Pakistan. So they may operate from Pakistan, but they hold their accounts elsewhere because it is complicated to send money out of Pakistan. So if it's complicated to send money out of Pakistan, that acts as a barrier to bring money into Pakistan. So perhaps one of the key policy areas for the government moving forward is to ensure that firms can actually make payments to suppliers abroad in an easy way, so that foreign exchange can enter and exit in a relatively easy way, and that firms are not forced to convert, for example, profits immediately into Pakistani rupees. So these are a couple of thoughts on the policy area, but all in all, a remarkable performance of the knowledge-intensive services in Pakistan that I wanted to point to. Over to you, Abdullah.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalo. You've rightly pointed, and on the export side of Pakistan, no doubt has a remarkable transformation. But still, there are a few challenges that, as you've highlighted, especially for the payment method for the small firms is very crucial, and they have to face many issues in that. Keeping in view the time, I would like to request Federal Secretary Dr. Sohail Rajput Saab for his remarks, and I would like to, sir, request you to shed light on the importance of the services, particularly the reforms in trade, foreign direct investment, and regulatory policies that are needed for Pakistan firms, small firms, to benefit from servicification and digital platforms.
Thank you, Abdullah. Thanks for inviting me to this forum. And
thank you, sir.
Greetings to our other panelists. It was wonderful listening to all of you. Some very interesting presentations were made. Unfortunately, I couldn't join in time because there were some technical glitches. So I missed some of the earlier presentation, maybe talked by Naji. I didn't listen to that. But I joined when Valerie was making her presentation. So the point she was making about the new regulatory requirements was interesting. Similarly, the impact of FDI on service exports, as demonstrated empirically by Shazia, was something very important and relevant. And the comparison given Siddharth between the Chalda and Daraz was also interesting to listen to. So some very good presentations, and the talk by Kushnood and then also by Gonzalo. I think there is not much left to say because most of the points have been adequately covered by the distinguished panelists here. But I would like to emphasize upon that yes, the Gonzalo has rightly mentioned that knowledge-intensive services have grown a lot in this country, and the exports have increased as demonstrated in the numbers. But there's a huge potential which is untapped. So this year, the government has set up a very ambitious target of 70% growth in IT and IT-enabled services exports. So last year, the growth was 47%, as mentioned by Brother Kushnusa. But this year, we are targeting a growth of 70%. For that, I think the major constraint, which has been highlighted again by Kushnusa, was the HR, because the graduates which are coming out of our universities are not readily employable. Hardly 10% of those are readily employable. So in order to meet that constraint of HR, the government needs to do some measures, and that shall focus on some short-term interventions and some medium to long-term interventions. For medium to long-term, we are in constant dialogue with the Higher Education Commission so that we can introduce some associate degrees, some tweaking in the degree courses so that those can be tailored to the need of the market and industry. So that dialogue is ongoing, and we expect some changes in the curriculum and some changes in but the short-term measures we want to introduce in next couple of months. So the boot camps and retraining the teachers in the academia, as well as focusing on the students who are in the final stages of their graduation and teaching them some of the skills which are now in demand of the industry. Those are our focus. So those may be 4 to 5 month courses which we have planned for this fiscal year. In Pakistan, the fiscal year will end in June 2022. So we are planning to introduce those interventions during the current fiscal year, and we expect to see some good results in the next fiscal year through these HR interventions. We have Pakistan Software Expert Board, which is the main agency of the government which focuses on the export of IT services, and that was underfunded. So that issue was highlighted very aggressively by Ministry of IT before the policymakers in finance and in the Prime Minister's office. And luckily we were able to convince them, despite our fiscal challenges, the fiscal deficits which the country faces, they have given a handsome grant to Pakistan Software Export Board this year. So about 50% of that grant will be spent on upskilling the HR, which I have mentioned through the short-term interventions. But rest of the 50% will go in marketing and branding. And for that, we're still working on some of the interventions which we need. We are thankful to Gonzalo also. He is also providing us the technical assistance. And we are thankful to Pasha also, because they are standing with us in this and they are trying to bring an alignment between the industry, the government, and the academia. This triangle is very important, and we are trying to have a strong collaboration between these three pillars, so that whatever we do has the broader ownership of the stakeholders and give us dividends. One more initiative which the government has planned for this year, and for that they have provided the financial resources as well, is to incentivize the good performance on the export side. So we are planning to reward the growth in the exports on the individual company basis, and particularly for the small and medium enterprises, which might, through some financial resources given by the government, may graduate to the next stage. So for that also, we are finalizing our suggestions. Again, we are in close discussions with Gonzalo for that, and the World Bank team also. So these are the major initiatives which we are undertaking to see that our exports, which have the great potential to grow, and some of the panelists have already acknowledged the growth which is taking place in the knowledge-intensive industry, but we are targeting much higher than that. On the policy side, yes, because the focus on growth, obviously, if you are familiar with the trade deficit numbers of Pakistan, is obviously the #1 priority, because we are running a very high trade deficit, and the only hope we see is to bridge that trade deficit is through growth in our services exports. But on the increasing the connectivity, and I can quote some numbers here, the growth in the broadband subscribers in 1 year is 24% in Pakistan. So that shows that the broadband penetration is increasing by a phenomenal number of 24% in 1 year. And now we have 109 million broadband subscribers. The tele density has reached 87% in the country, and the mobile phone users, the active SIMs, are 187 million. So that shows that the connectivity and the infrastructure required for this kind of growth is penetrating fast in the country. But much of this development is happening in the bigger cities like Karachi, Lahore, Islamabad. So we are now, through our Universal Service Fund, are focusing on increasing the spending from that fund into the underserved and unserved areas of the country. So for that also, through the Digital Pakistan vision of the Prime Minister of Pakistan, we have increased the number of projects drastically. 3 years back, when this government came into existence, the number of projects being done by USF was only 6 in that financial year in 2018-19. And now that number increased to 28 for this year. So it has increased by about 5 times. And the subsidy which is being spent on these projects, during the past 12 years, it was only 52 billion rupees. But during the 3 years, we have spent 31 billion rupees. And for the current fiscal year, we are again targeting to spend 18 billion more rupees just on the broad-based and optic fiber connectivity. So that is the focus in order to penetrate into the secondary and tertiary cities of the country. And when I talk about the infrastructure, we are also focusing on software technology parks. Again, in the secondary and tertiary cities of the country, in areas like Gilgit, Hunza, Iskardu, and Jacobabad, Kotki, and Hafizabad, those kind of places where the software technology parks, which provide the infrastructure for the broadband connectivity and the uninterrupted electricity for freelancers and for smaller companies, they can use those infrastructure. That is also one of where we are spending a lot. Just to be brief, I would just like to give a just very brief about the policies which we are in the final phase of planning. We are in the final phase of planning a Personal Data Protection Act, which will secure the cyberspace for the citizens of this country. So the data protection, you know, is a very contentious issue. So we are trying to be very balanced on that. We want to safeguard the interest of the big businesses, the large tech firms as well, but also like to ensure the sanctity of the data for the citizens of this country. We are also in the final stage of finalizing our cloud first policy in order to ensure that the cloud usage is increased in the country. We have already enrolled our cybersecurity policy, and now we are making an institutional framework for that cybersecurity. We are reviewing our national broadband policy as well as the digital Pakistan policy. So we are reviewing those, and in the next 6 to 8 months, all of these policies will be rolled out, which will create the ecosystem for the growth which we are expecting in the IT and IT-enabled services.
Sir, so Dr. Rajput Saab.
Yeah, I would like to stop here because I think.
Thank you, sir. Apologies, sir. Keeping in view the time constraints, sir. I'm extremely thankful to my panelists who have joined us virtually and for sharing their thoughts on the subject matter. And indeed, the policy recommendations that have been provided by our esteemed panelists will be shared with the government, and they would be looked into. So before just switching off our cameras, I would request everyone if they could switch on their cameras. Our IT team would like to take a picture. Ms. Shazia, if you could too. Ms. Ahad, Dr. Zoe, if you could also switch on your camera. Yes. Wonderful. So the IT team will be taking a picture. Once they give me the OK sign, then we'll sign off. Our good IT? All good. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time. And it was a very wonderful discussion. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.